Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another live episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. Welcome in. We are going to be talking about NFL Coaching Carousel for 2024. We have 9 positions opened as of right now. We're going to go through all of them, talk about potential candidates, potential fits, and have a little bit, not a actual ranking, but we're going to be ranking them loosely on the quality of each position. But before we get into it, leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. We're available on audio platforms, so Spotify, Apple, all of that. Go over there, follow us, leave a 5-star rating and review if you have not already. And joining me from Houston, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Wein. How you doing, man?
Well, I think hell's about to freeze over outside, so I'll probably be working from home as will a lot of other people, and I'm sure it's probably similar of a situation up there in Austin, Texas. So if you're out there and you're on the roads, be safe. We're through 4 wildcard games. I know you'll have some stuff to say about that maybe later on in this episode.
Yep.
And then we got 2 more tomorrow. And then on Tuesday, I'm thinking watch out for our divisional predictions. And then we got some more good stuff coming later in the week, including a dit hole and an NBA episode. So lots of stuff coming over the next 4 days.
Yeah, there's going to be a little rant at the end for that star behind me, the Cowboys, my team, for the performance they put out today against the Packers. Let's just say, shocking doesn't even begin to tell you how I feel about it, but I'll save that for later. Let's start with these coaching positions. What team did you want to start with?
Well, I think I sent out the order earlier this week. I thought it'd be easiest since they've already made a hire to start with the Patriots.
Yeah. They hired Gerard Mayo. Some people saw it coming. Some people saw it coming. For a lot of people, they were a little bit shocked by it. But I listened to Bootleg Football podcast, and they had basically the insider information that led them to making the prediction that they would immediately throw Mayo into the head coaching circle. And we don't really know a lot about him as a coach yet. We haven't seen him, call defensive plays or in, interviews or anything like that. But they clearly have a extremely high level of trust in him, and particularly Belichick and Robert Kraft. And clearly that that's what means the most to that organization. And it was something in their contract that made it to where he would become the head coach. And that's why it was such an immediate decision. And honestly, I don't feel positive or negative about it. I think it's just to be determined.
Yeah, I'm kind of status quo on this one as of right now. I think what Mayo surrounds himself with, both at the GM position and the moves that he makes on the staff, particularly at offensive coordinator, as I think he'll probably be, I don't know if he'll be the defensive coordinator or he'll call the defensive plays. It kind of seems like that initially on the surface, but I'm pretty sure this will be his defense in some way or another. I think what they do at general manager will be my first, like that's first on my board of levels of interest for what the Patriots do next. And then who he hires at offensive coordinator will be of particular of interest to me, because if we look at why the last couple of years, at least in my opinion, didn't work out with Belichick, it was a lot to do with uh, kind of a, I don't want to say they were inept in their feel of offensive talent, but this was a roster that was pretty void of offensive skill position talent. And it just wasn't a great offensive roster. And to add on top of that, they haven't drafted well, especially at the skill positions over the years. And ever since Brady, and particularly with Mac Jones, we saw him regress from his first year to his second year, now to the point in his third year where he had to be benched. So I think the mismanagement and the lack of development with Mac Jones had a lot to do with Bill Belichick and the Patriots parting ways. And look, I think there are things that you can like about Gerard Mayo as of right now. First of all, he's young. He's 37. He's been in that locker room for 8 years. He spent 8 years as a player in New England under Belichick, and he's been on that staff now for at least a couple years as an assistant. So he knows the players, he knows the roster, he knows the locker room, he knows the organization. Um, I think New England knew. I don't think they make this move. This isn't an organization that makes moves rashly, or at least they haven't been over the course of the past 2 decades. I think they knew this was their guy. And there's something that they see in him that we won't necessarily know if it's legit or not until we see the moves that they make over the next month or two.
Yeah, there's a lot of dominoes that still need to fall with them, and you hit the nail on the head with the fact that they still need to hire a GM. For a long time, it was Belichick, and to me, that was the side that didn't work out. To me, it was the GM side of what Belichick was doing rather than his coaching, because those players were still fighting, even though it was a lost season. Even late into the year, they went out and beat the Steelers. They went out and gave the Bills a good fight for the entire game, pretty much. So I still think Belichick has a lot of good coaching left in him, and I wouldn't have blamed them if they kept him around and maybe demoted him to just being the head coach, but they felt it was time to move on. And I think having a fresh start has its own positives as well.
Yeah, and one more note I'll add is 4 other teams a couple years ago had targeted Mayo or at least interviewed him for their respective head coaching positions. So he's got to have or garner a level of respect around the league. Now, of course, there are rules that are implemented by the Rooney Rule that say you have to hire or you have to interview a certain amount of candidates, and a certain amount of them have to be minorities. But he was getting some interviews, including with the Philadelphia
Right.
Eagles before they went on to hire Nick Sirianni a couple years ago. So I think there is some respect across the league for Gerard Mayo, given that he played in the league for 8 years and he knows this organization inside out, which I think is a good thing for the Patriots. But you got to get the quarterback right. You got to get the GM right. And I think you got to get the OC right too. So there's still a lot of work to be done here, but this is a good start, I think. And we can't really make any judgments one way or the other until we see what this is fully going to look like.
Yeah, exactly. You just got to wait on it, and you just hope, if you're a Patriots fan, just get the quarterback right, and everything else will take care of itself.
Yes.
Because we saw what happened with the Texans. Obviously, they made other moves. They traded back up and got Will Anderson. There was other things that happened there, but you have a lot of defensive talent there. Just get your quarterback and maybe do like I guess, Cincinnati Bengals with the Andy Dalton era, where they drafted a receiver and a quarterback in the same draft. I think that's the kind of thing that they need to go after. Maybe multiple wide receivers even.
Yeah, I think so too. The next coaching hire that I wanted to talk about, I think this will be a perfect transition from one of the longest tenured head coaches in the league to one of the other longest tenured head coaches in the league, Pete Carroll. This was some bombshell news later
Yeah.
last week that he and the Seahawks had parted ways, or at least agreed that Pete Carroll will no longer be the head coach of the Seahawks. I think he's moving more into a off the field um, administrative role with Seattle, as far as I know. The team put that out last week. So let's first talk about why I think it'd be good to talk about why you think the Seahawks are making this move, and then we can kind of get into where we think John Schneider in this front office are going to go next, because this is I really like this roster. They've got young talent all over the place. There are holes that they need to fill, but I think this is a pretty attractive job when you look at it at the end of the day. They've got a lot of young talent. But first, let's talk about Pete Carroll and why this move was made, in your opinion.
Yeah, I think it's more so the defensive side of the ball that was the most disappointing part of this season, in my opinion. You have, all of this new defensive talent brought in. Obviously, Devon Witherspoon, Tariq Woolen last year, Boye Mafe coming into his own this year. And a lot was made about what this defense would be. There was a lot of talk about this defense taking the next step and becoming a top 10 unit. And instead, it went backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that had to do with um, just maybe there was a disconnect in terms of what was being asked of the players and what was actually being executed.
Yeah.
And it seemed like there was just a lack of buy-in, maybe. And there was like blown coverages and all of those types of things. And those are glaring red flags when you're an owner and you're looking at your team, watching them play, and you're seeing blown coverages all over the place in a defense that you've invested a lot in, draft capital, money, all of it. That really raises the eyebrows of the owner and forces their hand a little bit. And I think that's what ultimately led to this decision. And ultimately, do I think it was the right decision? I think so. I think um, Pete Carroll, he's a fantastic coach. He's the quintessential players coach. When people say players coach, you think of Pete Carroll. That is the name and the face you think of. Him bending over, chewing the gum, all of it. But I think they needed this team in particular just needed a new voice and just something fresh and a fresh start. And I think Seattle was kind of thinking about this move for a while and kind of held off a little bit, knowing how good of a coach Pete Carroll is and still is. But I think it's ultimately the right move to make.
Yeah, I'm in 1000% lockstep with you on what you said about uh, Carroll no longer, I guess, running this franchise, which he did win a championship with and get to multiple Super Bowls with, because I think the things that he had preached, say Monday to Saturday, weren't always translating to Sunday when it matters the most, at least in the past couple of years. And, this franchise has gone, or they have undergone, a fair amount of turnover at important positions the past couple of years, quarterback being the most prominent of which. They've also had, I think, a couple changes at the OC position. They've had to remake their offensive line. They've had to go out and remake their secondary after, the transition from the Legion of Boom to some of these younger guys. They've really struggled to find, pass rushers. But I think you hit it on the head when you said, there just wasn't, I don't think, no longer, after 14 years in a very, very successful run, that collective buy-in. and you ultimately need that to be successful in the NFL. When you look at the Seahawks, um, over the past couple years, there's been a trend. Um, you know, these lopsided losses that started to pile up. Russell Wilson was a prime example of a star player and a team captain that didn't seem totally bought into their offensive vision, whatever that was at the time. Um, and during the past 2 seasons, you're absolutely right about the defense. The defensive players didn't appear to be believers in the messaging that these coaches were delivering. Um, Seattle's tackling in particular has been horrendous for the most part over the past couple of years. And I don't think it's a personnel problem. I mean, maybe some of it is, but I like their personnel on the defensive side of the ball, especially in their back end. Um, it's been reported in The Athletic that their tackling techniques were once used as teach tape for the rest of the league because they were so horrendous. Like, don't do what they're doing. That's been reported in The Athletic. Um, yeah, it's just I think it's a variety of things, but at the end of the day, all good things come to an end. Carroll had a great run in Seattle. He won a Super Bowl. He's one of the only coaches ever, I believe, to win both a national championship in college and an NFL Super Bowl. So at the end of the day, he's going to the Hall of Fame. I'm sure he'll be great in whatever administrative or front office role that he's transitioning into. But I think we're in lockstep on the fact that it's time for a new guy at the helm of this organization because they might not be that far away from getting back to contention in the NFC.
Yeah.
Because I do like their roster. So let's talk about prime candidates for Seattle. Do you have anybody in mind I mean, I know there are a ton of names out there that have already been mentioned, but does anyone stick out to you?
Well, um I think you would want to bring in someone who's on the younger side of things.
Yeah.
Definitely. Pete Carroll, very young, 71, obviously, but I think a fresh face in the locker room, maybe a little bit more forward thinking, because as we know, Pete Carroll was known to be the head coach that was in the offensive coordinator's ear, like run the ball more, run the ball more, and I think maybe that part of it just got old. So I think a offensive minded guy
Yep.
might fit this team, and I think ultimately Seattle might be drafting a quarterback this year. We haven't talked about this much on the show yet, but Gino had a solid year, but ultimately didn't show that he um, was the guy like moving forward. Like he didn't cement it in concrete. Let's just say that he looked like more of a bridge guy than the guy, if that makes sense. So you want to bring in a offensive minded guy who, for the quarterback you bring in through the draft, can develop him. So to me, that's either I look at Ben Johnson. Obviously, if you're willing to, you know, have the cash for it, Seattle is the roster that I think Ben Johnson would find intriguing, just because you have positions like valuable positions already covered. You have Boye Mafe at edge, two good corners, two good tackles, young tackles as well. I think there's a lot to like there. But I'm interested to hear what names you throw out there, because I'm running a blank a little bit. I had some names written down, but
Well, I think you're right. First of all, I think this is the first time in a while that John Schneider has had full autonomy over the Seattle Seahawks since being hired by Pete Carroll back in 2010. And I think he's done a remarkable job as general manager. But there are a couple questions I think that would need to be answered from John Schneider himself in order to kind of narrow down who in particular Seattle is going to target. Number one is Schneider really going to go after kind of that Pete Carroll 2.0? Meaning like, is he in search of a guy who maybe has more familiarity with the Seahawks organization? In that case, you could go with Dan Quinn, and he's already been linked to Seattle, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen. I, in particular, am in agreement with you that they should go to the offensive side of the ball. And one name that may be underrated, but that sticks out to me if they are going for a guy that maybe has some familiarity with this organization, it would be the offensive coordinator for Tampa Bay, Dave Canales.
Canales, yeah.
I think is his name.
Yeah.
And the reason is because number one, while he doesn't have any head coaching experience, which you would like to get, but that's not always available in spades in today's NFL. He has probably the most understanding of Seattle's culture. He spent 13 years with the Seahawks, and he followed Carroll from USC to Seattle. He's been with Pete. I mean, he knows this organization, and I think, has done a fantastic job this year with Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield had career highs in completion percentage, yards, touchdowns. Um, if they're going to bring in a new quarterback, Canales only being 42 years old, so he's really not that old. He's only 5 years older than Gerard Mayo, who's now the youngest coach in the NFL. I think that would be a name. I like the name you brought up, Ben Johnson, but I think he's going to be at the top of a lot of teams' lists, and rightfully
Right.
so, as he's totally. I mean, he's got the Lions onto the divisional round, so you're not even going to be able to interview Ben Johnson. The NFL rules state you can't interview a current coach for a current team in the playoffs until after the divisional round. So they'd have to wait another week to interview Ben Johnson. But I think Dave Canales' name is the name that sticks out to me. I don't know if Seattle will go that route, but I'm interested to know, like, you look at this roster and you're probably going to have Tyler Lockett back. You have DK Metcalf. You've got the tackles, Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. You've got 2 or 3 really good backs that I like, Zach Charbonnet. You've got Kenneth Walker. You got some good tight ends, although I think 2 of them are impending free agents, Noah Fant and Colby Parkinson. But you still have Will Dissly. I'm just interested, like, and this will be my final note on this. Does Schneider prefer a coach with a specific background? He saw Mike Holmgren back in the day lead his team to the Super Bowl back in 2005. And he was an offensive guy. Schneider, as I understand it, grew up a big Packers fan and was a big fan of Mike McCarthy. And that might be it. I'm not going to even go there because that might be a sour subject right now. Or does he want, a defensive-minded guy to reinstill that toughness and figure out this defense? So I don't know.
A name that I haven't heard thrown out this head coaching cycle, but I think is still a very good candidate is Lou Anarumo,
Yeah,
the Bengals defensive coordinator. I think he is still a premier candidate if you are looking for a defensive guy. I think he has to be one of the tops on your list if you're looking for someone who's won on the highest level and has not only constructed defenses that have, taken down elite quarterbacks in, playoff scenarios, but has been consistent in doing that as well.
Yeah, you look at this roster, and this is my final take. Devon Witherspoon, DK Metcalf, Kenneth Walker, Charles Cross, Abraham Lucas, Tariq Woolen, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who they just drafted, Zach Charbonnet. Anthony Bradford, Boye Mafe, Uchenna Nwosu, the edge rusher who they brought in a couple years ago, Draymond
Who
Jones.
was hurt this year as well.
Yeah, they have like a core of players who are all under the age of 28 and all under contract. So I think it's a pretty attractive job. I think it'll be telling. Like if they hire an offensive guy, I think that's going to be telling of what I guess they maybe plan to do in the draft. I think
Yeah,
that
definitely.
offensive guy will want to get his own guy in at quarterback and then go from there.
Right. Exactly.
The next
Okay.
job I wanted to transition to because it's been one that we've talked about a lot. Because I'd like to go AFC, NFC, AFC, NFC is the Los Angeles Chargers. This could take up the next 10 or 15 minutes if we really wanted it to.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into this one. What are your initial thoughts on, first of all, the departure of Brandon Staley, which we probably don't have to spend too much time on, and
Yeah.
then what you think is best for the Chargers?
Well, the Chargers need a complete mindset shift. I think Staley, while when you brought him in, you wanted to bring in a forward-thinking guy who was, very into the analytics side of things, and you wanted to bring in a different type of thinking, which was, I think, the right thing to do at that time. And here we are again saying the same things. But to me, this time, it has to be someone with experience, and it has to be someone who has experience building a football culture that just instills winning. Like we see it around the league. Like it's hard to put into words, but it's just a level of toughness. It's a level of like commitment within the entire roster. You got to get all 52 guys on the same page. And with the Chargers, it feels like there's just not like a level of toughness there. Like little things like, say, you're going into Green Bay, right? You go and play a game at Lambeau Field where everyone in the league knows you need a different type of cleat to play in Green Bay. They go to Green Bay, they wear the same type of cleats, and all of a sudden you have all your guys slipping all over the field and they lose that game. Little things like that, like attention to detail, it has to change. It has to be there. And I don't know if the NFL is, super ready to, hire this particular guy again, but Brian Flores is a guy that I immediately thought of as someone who wouldn't be as overpriced as, say, Jim Harbaugh. So you don't have to take the risk of, say, if things go south, you didn't pay the guy $80 million over 10 years. I think it'll be a little bit more reasonable in that sense. And we know he's a good football coach as well. Mike Vrabel is a guy I thought of as well. And then, of course, Bill Belichick. And what do all those guys have in common? They instill toughness into their football teams. That has to be priority number one.
Yeah, I think I'll start here. Number one, I think they need to possibly overhaul the structure of the power dynamic in this organization. Because as I understand it, Tom Telesco, who I really like, has largely been responsible for running the football side of the organization. This has been a largely GM driven organization for the past decade or so. And he's a really smart guy. He came up under the tutelage of Bill Polian in Indianapolis in the Peyton Manning days. So he's a really smart guy. We know this roster, at least on paper, we've talked about it over and over again. It looks to be playoff caliber. It looks to be like you got the quarterback. You've got some weapons. You've got talent on the defensive side, but you're right. Like toughness, that has to be of priority. And I think the structure of this organization as a whole, I mean, they should at least look into possibly making some changes, even if it's not a total overhaul. Telesco did take some input from his head coaches, particularly in terms of player acquisition, but all three head coaches, whether that be Mike McCoy, Anthony Lynn, or Brandon Staley, it just hasn't, for whatever reason, worked out. And so I think Spanos has already said that ownership will be reevaluating this power structure over the course of their search for a new head coach. But I think you're right. Look, I think Brian Flores was definitely a name that came to mind for a lot of these jobs. And I think if you're the Chargers, you want a proven winner. You definitely want a proven winner in the NFL or wherever the guy has been. And in the one opportunity that Brian Flores got as a head coach, I would say he was pretty damn successful. It was just some other things that ended up taking that thing off the rails. Mike Vrabel, I think, would be great. I think he'd need to get the OC hire correct, but I wouldn't have a problem with that at all. He'd definitely be a guy that would get the defense right and would instill toughness, knows that side of the ball, played on that side of the ball, and I think would be good as just like kind of that executive type head coach, like the, what's the word
like
that I'm looking
CEO
for?
type.
CEO type is what I'm looking for. But I think it's already been reported that they're going to interview Jim Harbaugh. And look, I don't know that Jim Harbaugh actually wants to return to the NFL, but it seems like we go through this every single year, so we might as well talk about it. He's going to interview for the Chargers job. I'm not sure what other jobs he has in mind or who's going to make a phone call to Jim Harbaugh, but I think he checks a lot of boxes. He's fresh off leading Michigan to a national title. I think this could be the most likely offseason he returns to the NFL after almost a decade in Ann Arbor. He's really now got nothing left to prove at the college level. He's won a national championship. He's brought Michigan back to being in the national spotlight and being like the program that we all think Michigan should be. And I think when you assess Harbaugh's fit, he's won everywhere he's been. He went 44-19-1 in his 4 seasons as head coach of the San Francisco 49ers back from 2011 to 2014. He took them to the Super Bowl. He's won at the college level. He's a proven winner. He played quarterback in the NFL. So I think another thing the Chargers should be looking for is some offensive continuity for Justin Herbert, because that's something Justin Herbert really hasn't had up until this point in his career. He's going on now, I think, what will be his 4th OC in his career in the league. And what is this going to be? His 5th or 6th year at quarterback?
Yeah.
They got to get that right, and I think Spanos will prioritize that. But I think Harbaugh would be. I mean, I think he'd check a lot of boxes. I think those other guys would check a lot of boxes as well. It's just, where does this organization go next? Because it feels like every move that they've made over the past 5 years, they've been walking on, it's like they're walking on ice that's about to crack or grass that's about to break.
Every move they make feels like a cry for help. Like they're like, "Hey, LA fans, look at me, I'm over here," and they're just like, "Nah, I'm good."
Exactly.
Like, oh my gosh, I think in terms of filling out the depth of this roster this year, they got it wrong in terms of just going past the starters. The starters, like the starting unit, it's as good as any in the NFL for the most part. But the backups, the depth of the roster, it just wasn't good enough. So I think the GM has to be held accountable for that as well, and then everything from there. Well, we'll see what happens, but I think ultimately, I think Telesco will ultimately have to go for things to, or have to change some of his philosophy for things to really turn,
Yeah.
for them to turn the page.
Yeah, I agree. And another name that I've heard that I'll just throw out there that I think they're going to interview is Leslie Frazier,
Mm-hmm.
the defensive coordinator from the Buffalo Bills, who, as I understand it, is no longer under contract with Buffalo. So I guess that's after this season. Is he still with the Bills? Wherever he
Yeah,
is, he's going to be interviewed, I think, uh, this week, or maybe they've already interviewed it. I'm not sure.
yeah,
So
I've heard his name thrown around for the Panthers, but of course they're in a very different situation. They're in a situation that the Texans were in 2 years ago, basically. But we'll get to them later. Now for our next team, though, who'd you have next on the list?
I had the Washington Commanders next.
Okay, yeah. So they just fired Ron Rivera. I think when talking about the Commanders, it's worth taking into account the new ownership group that has taken over there and some of the decisions they've made in the past. This is the ownership. This is the owner that owns the not the Phillies, the 76ers. And we
Mhm.
know they've been very radical with some of their moves and been very uh, aggressive in wanting to win. And obviously that's a good thing for the Commanders, and that's a huge upgrade from what they had before. But um, with that in mind, who do you think the Commanders will go for in their coaching search?
Well, I think it's interesting to just first talk about the end of Ron Rivera's tenure
Yeah,
in Washington. Um, I feel like I like Ron Rivera. I think he's a good football coach, but it felt like at the end in Washington, especially with the new ownership, like if we didn't see significant improvement this year, like he wasn't going to see the fifth year of his contract, and so
yeah,
um, it felt like at the end, you know, he's a great speaker. He's great at the podium. He's a football lifer, raised from a military household. Had success in Carolina. Um, is kind of that more of that CEO kind of type head coach. But it felt like he was kind of at the end winning the press conference, but not winning on the field, if you know what I mean. Like,
yeah, yeah.
um,
There was
and
nothing he could say at the podium to, you know, make what was on the field right.
exactly. And it just felt like, especially at the end of this season, it felt like Sam Howell regressed a little bit from where he was earlier on the season, where I actually thought he was showing some good things. And near the end of the year, it kind of soured a little bit. And I mean, whether the Commanders had any kind of success or not, I mean, who knows? Rivera might be gone anyways because of the new ownership. They want to get their guy in the building, and rightfully so. But I feel like that's kind of my end of Ron Rivera, and I'm not sure what the future holds for Ron Rivera. Does he get another job? Does he retire? It's interesting. I haven't really thought about it too deeply, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that before we go into coaching candidates.
Yeah, I think as someone who's watched a lot of NFC East football, it really comes down to the defense for me. I mean, going into week 12, I mean, this offense, they were I think top 5 in the league in total yards. They were moving the ball consistently. And this defense just from week 1 to week 18, it just seemed like this defense failed to make any progress or show any progression um, in any type of way. It felt like week 1 there was problems in communication on the back end, in consistently getting pressure, in consistently, getting stops on third down, and in week 18 it was all the same issues. I think it was more so the defensive side of the ball, and obviously the Sam Howell part, as you mentioned, that was the nail on the head. I think Eric Bieniemy ultimately, I think, did a really good job if you look at it big picture wise, and I think Sam Howell was victim of just he got a little bit greedy at the end of the year with how rough his defense was playing. He started to force it a little bit more. And we've seen a lot of quarterbacks fall into that trap. And, for his sake, I hope that that's not the last opportunity he gets, because it very well could be. But I think ultimately Ron Rivera, I think if you look at the last 3 years he was there, with all of the controversy surrounding that organization, he did as good of a job as anyone could have done, to be honest. Like you mentioned how good he is at the podium. Every single week while the owner who shall not be named was still there, it was rumblings about sexual misconduct here and drama here and drama here, and not the
Yep.
focus on the football. And he had to
Mhm.
deal with that. He had to, walk on eggshells through that week after week after week, and he was still able to lead this team to winning football games. So he did a really good job in kind of stabilizing the organization in the years where they really needed stabilization, and I think it was just time to move on.
Let's get into coaching candidates. But first, a big piece that we're missing in the conversation here is that the Washington Commanders, along with the new ownership, have decided to hire Adam Peters as their new general manager. And the important thing to know about Adam Peters is he's right now the assistant general manager in San Francisco.
Mm.
So they're bringing a guy over from an organization that knows what they're doing. Really smart guy, as far as to my knowledge. He's going to be their next general manager. The contract isn't signed yet, but that's because there are rules that prevent it from being signed right now,
Right.
because San Francisco is still competing in the playoffs, obviously. This is a guy that, came up the ranks scouting for Bill Belichick back in the day with the New England Patriots. He also was with that Peyton Manning-led Denver Broncos team. And this is the guy that now, after the season is over, whenever he can get to his duties, will have a big say in who the next head coach is going to be in Washington. Now, I think we could be watching a couple of the names that I have in mind right now in the playoffs. One is they want to go to the offensive side of the ball, Texans offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick. Because remember, something interesting about Bobby Slowick is I believe he used to be with
Washington. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, he's reformed that offense in Houston. We saw it yesterday. He's made C.J. Stroud look like an MVP at times. He's young. He's 36 years old. He spent time in San Francisco with Adam Peters for 6 years, arriving there in 2017 with Peters. So they kind of came in at the same time. I think that would be my call if I were Washington, just looking at the success that Slowick has had with a young quarterback already in CJ Stroud, and kind of the infrastructure that he's had to work with that offense. I think they have a good infrastructure on this Washington offense, at least at the skill positions. They need to do some work on the offensive line, but I mean, you look at the way that Houston's had to reshuffle that offensive line all season long, and they've done a pretty good job of that. I feel like he's young. He fits the mold of coaches that are winning right now in the league, young offensive innovators, smart. And he was formerly in San Francisco a passing game coordinator for an offense that ranked third in passing efficiency and fifth overall. I mean, a passing game that's been very successful in San Francisco. And he knows the new general manager. Like, that seems like the most obvious connection to me. But other names that I've heard, Ben Johnson would be another call that I would make at least. We'll see where that goes. He's kind of the same thing, like really smart, innovative offensive mind. Assuming the Commanders are probably maybe going to draft another quarterback, I think he'd be able to work with that quarterback. He's young or on the younger side. Those would be probably my top two names, but I've heard Belichick. I've heard the Lions DC Aaron Glenn might get a look in Washington. We'll just have to see. But the more I think about it, I think Bobby Slowick would be a great fit, or I think Ben Johnson would be a great fit in Washington.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Bobby Slowick was in Washington. Mike McDaniel was also in Washington on that very same staff. Kyle Shanahan, of course. I mean, that 2013 coaching staff for the Washington football team was just insane. And if you ever have time on your hands, go look up that picture of that coaching room. It's unbelievable. But for me, the name that I wanted to throw out there, you mentioned a lot of great names, but Frank Smith, the offensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins, a little bit older, 42 years old, but has a background as a wide receivers coach, and Mike McDaniel has spoken very highly of him as well. So I think he could be a great option because, I mean, personally, I think Bobby Slowick could benefit from maybe sticking around in Houston, maybe a couple of years with CJ Stroud and that crew. And it's not that he's not ready, but personally, I think just selfishly, I want to see how that group does over the next couple of years with a chance to grow a little bit. But I think those were a lot of great options there. And I think this job is pretty desirable just from the fact that it's a completely blank slate. Like, you have a chance to really right the ship for an organization that's historic and hasn't been run well over like a 3-decade span, but you have a chance to really turn this thing around. You have new ownership there that's a little bit more stabilized. They're going to provide the resources you need to go win. And you have talent there. You have a great group of receivers. And I mean, that's more than the Carolinas have. That's more than Carolina has.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned that about Slowick because it feels like if you're Slowick, you would much rather probably stay in Houston and work with what you know and not venture into the unknowns of an organization, as you mentioned, that's been poorly run for forever now and does not have a sure thing at quarterback quite yet. I'm betting on CJ Stroud over any of these quarterbacks in this draft, no matter how good you think this quarterback draft class is.
Yeah.
There's a very there's a slim chance that one of these guys in this upcoming draft turns out to be as good as CJ Stroud has been in his rookie season. And look, as good as some of the pieces on this Washington roster are, they've got work to do, especially on the lines of scrimmage, on that offensive line, on the defensive line, as they traded away two major pieces of that defensive line earlier this season. I think they got work to do in the secondary as well, but we're not here to talk about roster. We're here to talk about the coach. Right. The next team I had on my list was the Tennessee Titans. I'll start with you. Of course, they parted ways with a name that we've mentioned here on this podcast already many times, Mike Vrabel.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because they clearly have a something very specific in mind for a new coach. Because for one, they hired a new general manager in season a few years ago. They fired their general manager in season, which is a very rare move to make. And at that point, Mike Vrabel maybe thought, "Oh, now I have a little bit more power to make these decisions." And ultimately, obviously, that wasn't the case, or else they wouldn't have made this move. So clearly, they want a hierarchy within that organization. They want it to be GM then head coach when it comes to making decisions. So I would say for this um, particular spot, I would go for, obviously we've said this over and over again, but a guy that's young and particularly offensive minded, who's going to help Will Levis develop, because that has to be the number one priority. Um, Ultimately, I don't think I would have pulled the trigger on firing Mike Vrabel, because clearly the players loved him for one, and they were still, like, even in a lost season, even in a year where they seemingly didn't have much to play for late in the year, they were still going out there and competing, man. Like, um, I don't know. I like the style of coach that Mike Vrabel is, and I just don't think you give that away so easily.
Yeah, it's tough, but at the end of the day, in terms of, I guess, what Tennessee should do next, I think you're right. You got to prioritize um, the quarterback position in Will Levis, a guy that were very high on and showed some good things this year. Go out and hire on the offensive side of the ball, because, I mean, hell, in your own division, you got Shane Steichen. You've seen how that works out. I know Indianapolis did not make the playoffs, but
They're
they
scary.
were
Yeah.
the closest thing to it, and they're going to be scary down the road. You've got Doug Peterson. I know there are some other problems in Jacksonville right now, but I mean, he's had success. And even though D'Amico Ryans isn't a offensive-minded coach, he's got an infrastructure built around him with the OC, the quarterback. And Texans aren't going anywhere. I don't think the Jaguars are going anywhere as long as they have Trevor Lawrence. They just got to get some things worked out on that roster, I think. And I think Indianapolis is going to be a legitimate team next year
Oh yeah.
with Shane Steichen. And to be fair, we don't really know much about Anthony Richardson yet, but my guess would be Shane Steichen's going to make that guy look pretty
Oh
good
yeah.
at the very least. So, yeah, you got to go get an offensive guy that can maximize the talents of your young quarterback, Will Levis, that can figure out this offensive line, which was a disaster for most of the season. And we're going to do some sour rankings later on, probably in the week between um, the championship games and the Super Bowl. That will happen. We'll find a good time to do that. We don't want to dilute the playoffs with totally that right now, but we'll get to it. But I think, I mean, it's probably a lot of names that we've mentioned so far. Unless you wanted to go out and get a defensive guy and try to make a home run OC hire, I feel like the safe bet would be going young and offensive minded, an offensive innovator, and a guy that's good with quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think the only guy that I could see them going with that is a defensive guy is Mike McDonald, because he has experience coaching offense as well. I think for a short period of time, he was on the offensive side of the ball and then switched over. But ultimately, I think it's got to be offense, and it has to be someone who not only um, can make Will Levis, well, not make, but lead Will Levis into the right direction, but also make things easier for him with the scheme that they run. So like we've seen Jalen Hurts and guys like that with a guy like Shane Steichen blossom into great players with the level of scheming that they have. So that's the blueprint they want to go with, and I don't blame them. I think it's just the arms race of the AFC South right now, which I never thought I would be saying, but it's a thing.
Okay, so how about this? Let's get to the Panthers, and let's do a quick briefing on the Raiders, and then let's get to your Cowboys rant
Okay.
and get out of here.
All
Does that
right.
sound good?
Yep. Perfect. And
Okay, so go ahead.
yeah, and we can definitely move a little bit quicker for these last few. Okay, the Panthers. I touched on it earlier. It's not great right now. This is a very similar situation the Texans were in 2 years ago when they hired David Culley. And I know that's not what Carolina fans want to hear right now, but I think that's just the reality of it. And right now, I don't know if you go with the bridge coach thing that the Texans did because that was very strange. But I do think you want a guy who is for right now going to just stabilize things. And believe it or not, I actually do think Ron Rivera could be an option there. I don't think they would go back to Ron Rivera. I think that's just the connections there. I think it's just too much. I don't think they would do that. One name that did cross my mind was Leslie Frazier, the defensive coordinator for the Bills. I think it's going to be a candidate like that that's a little bit less on the radar and isn't quite as looked at as a top candidate. I think it'll be a more low key hire for right now, and I think it'll be get a guy for a couple of years, stabilize things, get things back on the right track, and then maybe have your home run move or your mainstay hire at that point. And I think the guy that comes in will come into the situation knowing that, and that's probably why you won't get the Ben Johnsons of the world or the Mike McDonalds of the world.
Yeah, I agree with you. Look, they fired their general manager, Fitterer,
Mm-hmm.
after 3 seasons. David Tepper, I've talked about this a lot when we talk about the Panthers. He was a minority owner in Pittsburgh for so long. Then he got the opportunity to buy the Panthers, who are one of the newer organizations in the NFL and haven't had a whole lot of success outside of those couple of years under Ron Rivera where they had an MVP quarterback for a year in Cam Newton, and they made that Super Bowl. Great for them. But look, you got to prioritize a couple things. Number one, who's the next GM? And what is going to be the pairing of GM coach? I think I like your approach that you put out there, but I'm interested to see who's going to be the next GM, who's going to be the next decision maker, who's going to be the guy that has a vision for this roster and how it should be built around the quarterback that you invested a lot in, like so much that you don't have your first round pick this year, which could be a very good use to you as of right now. But look, you believe that Bryce Young is a franchise quarterback. And so to make this all worth it, that's what you need to prioritize. And I know it sounds cliche. I know it sounds simple, but that's It's just like the matter of fact. I think that has to be the number one thing. And I'm not sure that David Tepper's what seems to me to be a quick hook and a quick temper is good for this franchise right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if it makes all that much sense with the timeline that they're on. It seems to me like, um, and I think a lot of Panthers fans would agree with me. Uh, his approval rating right now in Charlotte is very, very low.
Yeah.
For the decisions that he's made, a lot of the things that he said and done.
The antics,
Look,
just he
yes,
can't
it's
continue to
just
be a
like
story. Like he can't.
the owner cannot be the story. It's a very poorly run operation right now, and it doesn't matter who the coach is. It might not even matter who the quarterback is if the operation is run poorly. If there's no organization and structure between the front office and the coach, because it seems like things have just been kind of misaligned and unorganized for the past 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the Panthers, I go out and hire a president of football operations, and I basically tell David Tepper to fuck off, like until further notice. Like, just go away for 5 years and let me run this shit. Like
Yeah,
sorry for the language, but I have no other way of saying that. Just go away, and then I
yeah,
mean, once you have your president of football operations, have him hire the GM, then the coach, and then go from there.
I agree with you. Someone's got to take this thing over.
Yeah,
You got to right the ship in quickly because you cannot waste Bryce Young. You just can't do it. The capital you gave up to go get this kid, who I think is someday going to be a really good quarterback in the
yeah,
league, hopefully, um, has all the tools to do it. Um, and we've talked about that extensively, but this has to work, or you're just going to be set back that much further. Um, So yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of names out there. We don't have to rehash them all.
yeah.
Maybe we can do it more here in a week or two
Yeah,
once we have
I
a
just want
clearer
to get
picture.
one last statement out on the Panthers real fast. It's just like Bryce Young's superpower coming out of the draft was just his poise and just level of calm. Like just whenever he goes into that playmaking mode, it's like he's seeing the game in slow motion. And with all of the chaos that went on this year, like you just if you're a Panthers fan, you're just horrified that he's just gonna lose that because that can happen so fast. Like so many quarterbacks have had that it factor and that pocket presence. And once you get into the NFL and you have people running through just straight through the offensive line a second into the play, none of that matters. So just
Hmm.
some level of competency, please.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, quick notes on the Raiders because there's still some uncertainty as to who their new coach is going to be. Will it be Antonio Pierce? Will it not? Um, and then we'll get to your rant, and then we'll go. So I think the right move is probably to go with Antonio Pierce.
Yeah.
But I have heard that they are going to interview some candidates starting this upcoming week. I think that's they're actually looking into other candidates seriously, or they're just following NFL protocols and are ultimately going to end up going with Antonio Pierce.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think the right move is Antonio Pierce. I mean, the players, like it's been reported that the star players in particular, have gone to Mark Davis and told him this is our guy. And whether or not he listens to his guys, I mean, is yet to be seen. I mean, it was also reported that Antonio Pierce accepted an interview for the Falcons as well. So
Yeah.
that's another interesting development. But it's pretty simple to me. You had this exact same scenario. Was it 3 years ago? I think with Rich
Yep.
Bisaccia, and um, obviously you did what you did, and it is what it is. But you can't go down that road again. Um, this is a Raiders organization that doesn't need splash moves. It doesn't need any of that. It just needs stability and just a level of consistency from the top guy, the guy in charge. Just um, I don't know. It's just a level of just confidence and just I call it kind of the Dan Campbell factor of just if you just have a coach that's just gonna push and push and push, like the players feed off that. Like it's just that energy. I don't know how to quantify that or put that into words, but that's how I would describe it.
Yeah, it felt like, and you could see it, once Josh McDaniels was fired, there was a complete shift of just mentality and energy and aura in that locker room. And they started winning a couple more games. You saw Aiden O'Connell have some success. I think the players like Antonio Pierce. And here's a story that's developed over the past week. Not sure if you've heard this yet, but according to Crosby himself, Max Crosby, the star edge rusher
Yeah.
for the Las Vegas Raiders. But Crosby is a guy who I think he's voiced this out loud. He's tired of the instability, like you mentioned, within this franchise's leadership. This is a guy that wanted Rich Bisaccia to be the guy that was hired 2 years ago. Didn't get his way when Josh McDaniels was hired. And he's been vocal on social media in interviews about wanting Antonio Pierce to be the next head coach of the Raiders. And he's made his feelings public, and he said he hasn't particularly said out loud, like, I will demand a trade if Antonio Pierce isn't the guy. But he said all options will be on the table
Yeah.
if they don't make the hire that I want. And I think, look, you don't let one particular player force your hand as an organization, but I mean, he's like the most important player on your team right now. So
Yeah.
I would maybe kind of listen to him. Um, Especially
Yeah.
since,
And 3 years ago was one thing because he wasn't the player that he is now. But right now,
yeah, he's like
that's a dude I would not want to piss
he's a
off.
borderline, like I would even go as far as to say he's a tier one edge rush guy. Like he's
100%.
that
He's
good.
in the elite group. He this year I think he entered that elite group. Some would even argue he entered that before that, but to me this year he went up to another level.
And that what you just said, outside of quarterback, outside of left tackle, outside of maybe a shutdown corner, a star edge rush guy is like one of the more sought after commodities in today's NFL. Like not every team has a Max Crosby or a Micah Parsons or a TJ Watt or a Nick Bosa or whoever it may be. Like they're a select group of guys, and you don't want to screw around with possibly losing that guy over another dumb head coaching hire. Because let's be honest, the past couple that you've made have been shit. So like I don't know. Maybe listen to your players, maybe for once.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. Um I called it with the last hire. I think all of us could have with the Josh McDaniels thing, but I have a friend that's a Raiders fan who's been on this show before, by the way. Shout out to Connor if you're listening. Probably not, but we had a conversation after Josh McDaniels was hired, and he was like pretty positive about it. But I straight up told him like, dude, like this is not what you think it is,
Mm-hmm.
and It predictably went horribly. But we'll see what they do. I'm hoping that Mark Davis learned his lesson, but we'll see.
Okay, so NFL playoffs. I'll leave you the floor. What do you have to get off your chest?
Well, as you know, them boys lost to the Green Bay Packers this afternoon and gave up 49 points. They lost 49-32 in a game that wasn't even that close.
Mm-hmm.
This was a team that was the 2 seed. They won 12 games. They won their division. At times this year showed off a fantastic defense, but there's just the one thing that I would say about the Cowboys right now is when you have a culture where the owner likes to get buddy buddy with their star players and basically make promises and have a reputation of automatically paying any star player that was on his team, no matter their position, no matter their standing, no matter their reputation. If you're a star, which the Cowboys have a lot of stars because they play on national TV a lot, you're getting paid 100% of the time. And with that, I think there's just a lack of accountability there. And I think there's just an entitlement. I think there's got to be changes, but I don't think a new head coach is going to fix this. Like this has been the problem from when Jason Garrett was here, from when Wade Phillips was here, and even before that. Like this has been the same thing over and over again, and it's the same cycle. Um, and I've told myself like, oh, I'm a Mavericks fan. The Cowboys can't hurt me anymore. Yeah, right. I mean, you see the star behind me. I'm as big of a Cowboys fan as anybody, so I can't kid myself. But man, there comes a time as a sports fan when your fandom gets tested, and that is right now. That team that went out there today was just it was like it's not even that they got hit in the mouth and they didn't know how to respond. It was like they went into the game and expected to have a team play them and just roll over based on their reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Like they went into the game like, oh, they should be afraid of us. They like we don't have anything to worry about. And look what happened.
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of uh, my Cowboys friends, and believe me, I mean you're probably the most prominent of which, but because I do a podcast with you 3 times a week, but um, I have others, and they're feeling
Yeah.
the same kinds of things. So you're not alone. Uh, and I think, I mean, look, the game was the game. The game happened.
Yeah.
It felt like from the start, it was kind of the Packers' game. They
Yeah.
took the ball. I believe they won the toss. They took the ball. They took it right down the field. They ran the ball. Jordan Love was great all game. I think he's a storyline we'll be definitely talking a lot about on
Yep.
Tuesday. And I agree with you. Like, I haven't thought about McCarthy. I haven't thought about a lot of the moves that they should make. Some people seem to think he should be out. Some think, maybe he's not really the issue. Maybe the coach isn't the main issue here. Maybe it's something deeper than that. But yeah, it's just kind of look. I feel the same way sometimes about my team. And we'll see what happens tomorrow. Maybe I'll have a rant similar to this if uh, that team from Pittsburgh gets blitzed tomorrow in Buffalo. Maybe I won't because I kind of I mean, I kind of just at this point, I know, kind of like deep down, even if you don't always want to admit out loud, and that's okay because fan stands for fanatical. Like sometimes, like that's what fans are. They're not always
Yeah.
the most rational, most I guess realistic people. Uh, even though they know deep down what probably the right thing to do is, uh, fans say shit, and it's not always the kind of shit that's the right shit. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Quote of the year. I put that on a T-shirt right
Just
away.
quote that and put that on a T-shirt with the Raw Prospect Podcast logo on it, please.
Yep.
And we can sell it.
Michael Wein,
We
2024.
can sell it in the Raw Prospect Podcast fan shop. Kind of like they have, kind of like Josh Pate has Pate State. We can make our own. No, I'm just kidding.
The Raw store.
Oh, gosh, now we're just going off the rails. But
Yeah.
you know what I mean. Like we'll see what the Cowboys do. I'm really interested in what happens this week. I'm sure as you are. I mean, if we hear something on McCarthy in the next 24, 48 hours, even beyond that, I'm sure we'll get to that this week if it were to happen. I'm not even going to ask you hypothetical questions because we need to kind of get out of here. But I don't know what my point was in all that. It's just kind of a mumble jumble of thoughts. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, look, I think we were right about one thing, and that was that the Rams-Lions game was absolutely fantastic.
Yep.
And I'm joking here when I say this, of course, and I'm not directing this at anyone. But if you're not at least a little happy for the Detroit Lions, first playoff win in, what was it, 32 years, then you're a cruel human being, man. You're a cruel human being if you're not just, if you don't have that little, at least that little tiny bit of joy for what the people in Detroit are feeling
Like
right
they
now.
freaking did it, man.
They did it.
Yeah. I'll say this one last thing. I think I was a little disappointed in myself just because I went against my kind of like football philosophy and what I know. And that was just the fact that football games in January are won at the line of scrimmage, regardless of what type of skill talent you have and how much experience the skill talent has and all of that type of stuff. If you're not winning the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, you're not going to have a shot. And that was clear for me to me from the jump in that Cowboys game. It's just like, wow, like we are getting crushed at the line of scrimmage. And then the Lions game as well. Like I should have, seen that Lions offensive line as like a super weapon. Like that offensive line is going to give them a chance against anybody. And as much as I like watched them play over the course of the year and saw how good that offensive line was, I still didn't, put that together in my mind. So I guess that's a learning experience for me. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I think I might be rooting for I know I might be rooting for Tampa Bay just because I kind of want to see
Chaos.
I kind of want to see the Lions host another playoff game. But
They're guaranteed to host another playoff game.
they are?
Yeah, because the Cowboys lost.
Okay, well, I guess it doesn't matter then.
Yep.
So, okay. I guess it's going to do it for that. I think this was legitimately, like I know we say this a lot, and sometimes we bullshit, I think, but I think this was one of our better NFL episodes of the year.
100%. Yeah. This one felt loose and like, I don't know. I felt like we really flowed in this one. I don't know what the difference was, but I like it.
This sets a good tone for what should be a really good week. I've been in a pretty good mood all day. This weekend was a great weekend for the Texas Longhorns, and we'll be getting into that tomorrow on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. There's some big coaching news in the college ranks over the weekend, as not only does Alabama have its new head coach, but Washington has its new head coach, and the
Yep.
Arizona job is now open. So we'll be talking about Isaiah Bond, other portal stuff. We're going to break down another program tomorrow. We did Ohio State on our last dit hole. We'll do another one tomorrow. And yeah, then Tuesday we'll have more NFL stuff, and Wednesday we'll have some mid-January NBA stuff that I'm excited to talk about. So with all that being said, we're out of here. It's 12:36 a.m. Happy MLK Day to those of you who have off work. Congratulations. Be safe if you're on the roads tomorrow, especially if they're icy. And we will see you tomorrow night on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Like and subscribe. And just like the Dolphins, the Cowboys, the Rams, and the Browns, and Joe Flacco's magical run, we are gone. Peace out.
Joe Flacco is backo, not